Creating product experiences for a sustainable future. Learn how to be an agent of change as a designer. So, really excited to speak to all of you today, but I want to start with a few questions. So the first question, I'm really curious to understand, is like, do you think designers play a role when it comes to sustainability? Do you think like we're making an impact there? Raise your hand if you believe that. So basically, that we are actually playing a role. We all, of course, do it as human beings, right? But are we doing this as designers as well? Second question is, do you already feel equipped when it comes to designing more sustainable products? Who feels like you got this, fully confident? All right, actually not too many hands. That's good that you came today. Another question like people ask very often, okay, what's the impact actually of digital products when it comes to sustainability, right? So do you think like digital products, information technology is playing on your personal footprint more than 10% in terms of your personal footprint? Do you think it makes up more than 10% of your personal footprint? Like the smartphones you use, the televisions, all screens, saving all of our data. Okay. Right, let's find out. So actually, if we're looking at the big picture here, so this is from 2019, it's not super up to date, but it still tells the story. So this is an average annual footprint of a German person, yeah, 12 tons. And you can see that you have the climate target, so we're quite far away from there. But if we're looking at sort of digital information technologies, screens, etc., it actually is, so 2019, 0.85 tons. Of course, these numbers change a little bit, but still roughly works as a sort of way to tell a story here. So if we're looking into the blue area here, basically, digital, so how does that sort of goes into different parts? So basically, you can see that the manufacturing of the device is less than 50%, and then everything afterwards is behavior, actually, right? So usage with your device, the network, the data, so that's more than 50% actually. In fact, what's kind of interesting is that televisions, so if you have a TV, a flat TV, for example, at home, that actually makes a big chunk out of that also in terms of the annual footprint. So if you don't have a TV, you actually cut down already quite a bit. But now you could argue, well, design is not so important, right? I mean, like we designers here, we had like just this blue area down there. So we don't really make the biggest impact, right? I think actually we make one of the biggest impacts. And the reason for that is that even though the actual footprint of the digital process is very small, we're actually influencing the whole footprint. Because people consume content online, they consume information that we design, and all of that influences your personal footprint decisions, the decisions you make in your life, the decisions people make in businesses. And so basically, with what you do, you can actually influence the whole footprint. So a little bit about me, background. So I've been working I used to work at BMW for 5.5 years. And then I've been interviewing on my personal time with the podcast and conference format design drive over 75 design leaders on what is the impact we can have as a designer, right? What is the positive contribution we can make to the world as designers? And learned a lot. The other thing I'm going to use to share some insights on it is the startup I co-founded called Footprint, where we help businesses to reduce their emissions. So we're doing two things at Footprint. On the one side, we're building a software. We have built a software where people can, or businesses can log in and see like how they can reduce their footprint. And the other thing we're doing is something called Climate Sprint. It's a 2-week sprint we're doing with organizations to educate them about the footprint of their products, of their business, and then work together with them in terms of reducing it. Also very specific, sometimes very specific digital projects. So I want to talk about 3 things today. The first one, why do we as designers actually play a key role in terms of carbon reduction? I already talked a little bit about that. The second one, how can we help to make products and businesses more sustainable as designers? And the last one, what are very hands-on things that you can use in your product development process to make your products more sustainable? So I think like what's actually really interesting to look at is that the internet is actually potentially the single biggest thing we're ever going to build as a species. And we as designers, we're in the middle of that. And we can either use that as an opportunity to accelerate, make a positive acceleration to a sustainable future, or it can actually go the other way, right? And we as designers we are at the center, basically, of designing that internet. The other thing, and I really love this quote, is that the world is more designable than ever. So I think oftentimes as designers, we would like to have more power in the decision-making process. Of course, like everyone wants to have more power, but at the same time, we are already, the world that we are surrounded by is very often very random. People make different kind of decisions and we're just facing that reality. But at the same time, if you look like 15 years back, we didn't have these tools that we have today. So the people a little bit older here didn't know that. Like there was no like design tools that you can easily access, where you can collaborate in real time. Everything was much more complicated. There were not 3D printing tools that you can just basically use to, print something three-dimensionally. So the world is more designable than ever, and actually we have more tools than ever. Most of these tools are even for free, and way more inclusive and accessible these days. The other thing to think about is that design actually is a privilege. We don't often think about it that way. It's another quote I really like from Robert Fabkind, that we as designers are playing a key role in shaping their future. If you look around and talk to other people, they're not even part of that creation process. And I think we should treat design in that way, that it's actually a privilege to be part of shaping the internet. Many other things beyond that. And what's very important to keep in mind when it comes to sustainability is it really requires collaboration at the core. You cannot come up with anything or make any progress in any company without collaboration. One of the key reasons for that is that the whole user flow and all of the products and services that we use, they're so interlinked with each other. So we really need collaboration at the core. And when we started to develop Footprint, we said one of the core baselines is collaboration. And you cannot come up with anything just by yourself. You need the other stakeholders. You need the other people to implement different things. If you talk to a head of sustainability, for example, the head of sustainability at a company is relying on other teams to push things forward. So it's not a one-person show. And the other thing that you really need to do is you need to apply system thinking. So you need to look at really the big picture. This is where you can make the biggest impact. So the more close you are to the design brief, or the product brief, in fact, that's where you can make the biggest impact. In fact, I'm going to talk later a little bit also more on the executional side of designing digital products. But the biggest impact you can have, the more early you are involved as a designer. And then it's really something that has to be part of the culture, because it has to be. It's not a responsibility of one person, even though maybe that's a centralized function in a company with a head of sustainability, for example. But in the end, everyone has to sort of move the topic forward. And the other thing that you want to create, and Tarek has been mentioned this in his call as well, is create shared ownership. So basically, as you develop ideas together with the team, you want that basically like everyone is sharing that idea. You want as many signatures on that idea as possible. And as a designer, even though we are very emotionally connected to the ideas, specifically we start to design them, we have to really detach ourselves and step into the background and really work in terms of catalyzing these ideas forward, but really step to the back and have other people also come up with ideas. The more you have the people from the implementation side be part of it and the key decision makers, the better it's going to be for any innovation to survive. And this is very similar to, some of the folks here might work in design agencies or innovation agencies. If you work with a company, you want that the company or the other side you work with takes forward your ideas, right, and implement these ideas. And the higher the chance, basically, if you have the people sort of like take these ideas forward and present it internally, you can really get there. The other thing to keep in mind is that sustainability doesn't sit at the table. Right? If you are basically working on a data product, you have the developer maybe on the table, you have the viability side, there the product manager, marketing, sales, of course they are key decision makers. The desirability, this is our home as designers. And then, of course, sustainability. And we all know that if you want to have innovation, you need to win-win. You need to convince the viability person or the feasibility person. Sustainability oftentimes doesn't set the table. So what you need to do as a designer, if you're part of these early discussions, you need to see how you can bring sustainability into these discussions. How can you create a win-win between sustainability and viability, and it also is serving a human need? And that's a challenge, because it's one more complexity to everything. And basically, we all have different goals. So we all need to embrace sustainability as a goal for what we're doing. And really, one way how you do that, when you want to convince people, you often need to convince the viability side, right? And I think what's good to keep in mind is that you have to use business language there to really make them convinced that. And I think as designers, and I think some other talks shared this, we are used to have empathy for our users, but we have to have empathy also for the business stakeholders and really understand them, and then see how can we bring sustainability into the discussion when it comes to a match between the business KPIs, the product KPIs, and then how can sustainability help there. I was interviewing the head of service design at the Royal College of Arts, Cleve Gringer. He was appointed to be the head of design at a bank. And when he started his job, he's a designer, so he doesn't like to wear suits, right? No designer like to do that. So, but he actually started his job and he actually started to wear a suit when he was joining, basically as a head of design of that bank, because he said, well, he has to be like a chameleon, right? He has to sort of kind of blend in, because otherwise they're not taking you serious in that environment. Of course, in a bank, it's very serious business, right? So, he had to sort of match the audience, so people start to listen to them, right? And I think this is my same advice here. If you try to convince them, try to first really understand them. And you may wonder, okay, like I'm in these discussions, I don't know what to say. What are actually some arguments, right? So we got you covered. There's a huge database we put together just on really numbers in terms of the business impact that sustainability has. And luckily, by now, I think there's a lot out there, basically, on insights that you can use in discussions in terms of like how sustainability is actually propelling a business forward, in terms of consumer adoption, in terms of employee experience, etc. If you cannot scan the code, just reach out to me afterwards. I'm happy to share that. The other thing to keep in mind is that if you are involved very early, you want to align on the KPIs of your product. So you want to look into what is the actual behavior that you want to create, and talk to Matt Wallard. He created a book, or wrote a book called Start in the End. Great book, talking about how it's important, if you're involved early, to create something he calls the behavior vision board. And this is basically something you're going to use with your other stakeholders to align on. So we know the business KPIs, but what are the user behavior KPIs that we want to create? So what are the goals for the user? Right? Does sustainability play any role there in terms of awareness, maybe? And basically, you need to have that aligned at the very beginning before you start the ideation and of the product. Because as designers, we are just one piece of the bigger picture, right? You have other people contributing to that final customer behavior as well. You have the service people, you have the sales people, etc. So you want to align on that with everyone. There are 2 other great books on that. I think that some of you may know. Hook is another one in terms of understanding how to create habits for users when it comes to, you can apply that thinking actually to sustainability. And the other one being Atomic Habits, right? Because you really need to get a user to adopt like small habits, right? One of the learnings talking to all the design leaders is that there's, I think, 2 superpowers of design. And this ties together with what Tarek said. And the first superpower we have as designers, and this is really what we need to use, not just in doing for innovation at large, but specifically for sustainability, is the ability for us to materialize futures, right? And this can really help in the context of sustainability, because we can really move things forward by basically adopting other people's idea and materialize that. This can be a quick drawing in a meeting. This can be, like, of course, a quick prototype. It doesn't take a lot. Yeah? And I think oftentimes as designers we're underestimating that we can quickly visualize, and there's huge power in that. Because that's how we can accelerate things forward in a company, not just sustainability, but at large, and it helps to basically explore the different futures. Now, the other superpower we have as design is then, well, we can visualize, we can build things very quick. And this is very strong superpowers. We're also really good in sort of defining that outcome, or basically creating that outcome on the other side. So one of the great insights from Scott Wilson, the designer in the US, he always says, design is creating confidence. So basically, if you are able to create confidence through emotionalizing an idea, that's how you propel things forward, right? You can grow belief even. So I talk to a lot of different people that have, for example, like the story how YouTube Kids got created, or some of the work here with Neuralink. And it was very often coming from basically like an idea and emotionalizing that potential future, right? And get people excited for it. You get excited people who have to invest in it. The internal stakeholders, you motivate everyone because everyone sees what it could be, what it could become. So this were a couple of insights that were more on the strategic side, right? So maybe not everyone is able to participate maybe on these like more like high-level strategic discussion in terms of the product and the business. So you may want to, okay, what are maybe small things I can do as a designer to reflect on my product I'm working on, right? So the next slide focus a little bit more on sort of very hands-on things. So if we're looking at really UX UI, and this is like a great example I stumbled across a couple of years ago. And this is an app called Linebike. Many of you have maybe downloaded it. And I was using it, and basically after you pack, it shows you probably cannot read this, but how many carbon emissions you have saved by taking a bike compared to taking a car, of course. And of course, like someone feels great then afterwards, right? So, and it makes sense for the company to potentially put this after the conversion, right? Because it's basically before the conversion, on your user journey, you're always going to have a fight with a lot of people. What's the content we have to display, right? But from my learning, at least, like if it's after the transaction or the conversion in your digital experience you develop, you maybe have more opportunity to create awareness for sustainability. And the other great thing they did is they allow people to share it, right? Because that's multiplying the impact that you can have. So on one side, I was positively rewarded by this. It sparked curiosity to learn more. And of course, the ability to share it. So focusing on the positive is something also we have been learning a lot, is that if you try to focus too much on the negative, it sometimes puts people off, right? So that's a really thin line to walk. The other thing that you can keep in mind when designing your product are these basically aspects here. So you can ask yourself, how can you make a user either rethink a behavior they're doing? This can be just awareness, for example. Maybe refuse an action or a different behavior. Maybe reducing an action. And the other one on the physical side. If you work on sort of more physical products, so can you have someone reuse something? Can you have someone repair something? Or recycle something. Now, the other thing to keep in mind, if you work on sustainability, one way, of course, to measure it are carbon emissions, right? And that's just one piece of sustainability, of course. But it's a great way because you can quantify. You can quantify it very well. So if you have the ability to measure the carbon impact of, for example, a certain action the user is doing in your digital experience, you get a CO2 number. But what we learned actually is that people cannot do a lot with this CO2 number, right? Like, what is actually 10 kilograms CO2? Is that a lot or a little? I don't know, right? So we actually developed an application for that a while ago, basically to have people compare different emissions, because people really have a hard time understanding them. And what I would always recommend is if you're using carbon emissions in your interface to highlight something, that you try to contextualize this for a user. So you compare it against an action that people can relate to. Because carbon emissions, well, we have an understanding what 10 euros means, but we don't have an understanding what 10 kilograms CO2 means. We don't have, as a species, we haven't developed that understanding yet. We may do in the future, let's see. This is like another example, basically, to show people, what does it mean, right? How does it relate, and what's the positive impact here For example, you can compare things also in terms of like how much ice is not melting, etc. So to really contextualize and make it more emotional to people. And the other thing is, of course, like creating awareness. Again, like after the transaction is always a great moment. So in this case, for example, it's basically an overview of your mobility choices, right? So basically, you can set this in context for people, like how did you came to certain locations, and then basically have them basically making maybe a better decision next time. All right. So what I would like to do in the end is just give you another 12 very hands-on insights in terms of like what you can do in one of your next products. And what you're going to notice is that very often good UX UI matches a sustainable product or propelling or basically designing a sustainable product. So they're very interlinked to some degree, not on all levels, but to some degree. So the first one, of course, is very low-hanging fruit, right? The less screens you have for a user to do something, like the more basically you save and reduce the footprint of your product. The next one is, of course, cognitive load and friction, right? If you have someone getting into your product and they cannot make the action because they're overwhelmed with the content and there's too much friction, then basically it's also wasted energy, you could argue, right? So actually, the first two points are actually basically straight to good UX UI is basically also sustainable, right? Now, if we're looking further, the next one being about responsible content strategy, right? So really asking yourself, do we really need that content? Does it add value? Make sure it's findable, because otherwise, people are not going to find it. Ask yourself, is it actionable, the content? If I add a content on the website, can people do something with it? Can I link them somewhere forward to actually turn this into an action? And the next one, basically secondary information read. This is what I was saying earlier, right? Are you in your product able to add information about carbon emissions to raise awareness about that? Maybe even in a positive sense. The next one being design systems, right? So also low-hanging fruit, right? But if you are having a design system, of course, basically, and components that people can reuse, your product development process is quicker. It all depends, of course, like what you're building, right? And then this is one people ask very often, like what color is more sustainable in terms of the display, etc., right? And actually, if we're looking at OLED displays, the rule is fairly simple. So basically, the brighter the color, the more energy it consumes. That's why all slides, and I'm in black. Basically, the exception is blue, which consumes a little bit more energy. Fonts and icons. So if you can use standard fonts, that's more sustainable. Use SVGs instead of PNGs when it comes to icons. And this is a actually really big one. If you can reduce the image size, that actually plays a key role in terms of like your app and your website content. And then the last three, green hosting provider. Talking to that with your development team actually can have a huge impact. Set yourself a performance budget. So you can actually look at the performance of your website, and of course, the better the performance, the faster the loading is. The more basically sustainable your product might also be. So you can actually set yourself a budget for that also with your team and kind of work towards that, right? And can look at averages, etc. Tracking actually of actions and tokens, etc. in the interface actually also consumes a lot of energy. So just reflect on yourself, like, do we really need to track that? And the last one, using server-side caching, basically to make things not reload and basically have them stored directly. So what did we learn? So the first one, hopefully we learned, is that basically we play a critical role when it comes to designing products that shape user behavior. Yeah? Because digital is quite small, but we're shaping the big part. Not just on a personal footprint, but also on business decisions, etc. The other one is like we can have an even bigger impact if we involve very early on and can help to catalyze ideas forward. Yeah? If we can visualize and have people have confidence in ideas. And the other one is basically if you're executing on a product brief and you haven't been able to be involved in a product brief, just reflect for yourself what are the things that we could do on that level, and also educate people in your team, because people might not know what is actually possible. So that's it pretty much. If you'd like to have more links in terms of how to design more sustainable, we have actually a huge database of links and resources. Just reach out. Or if you want to look into how you can reduce your emissions of, let's say, your product or business overall, we do this a lot. But that said, I'm looking forward to the questions, and thank you so much. And just connect with me here, and happy to send over the links. Yeah?